Hello and welcome to the Sight and Sound Video History Series of the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. I'm Tom Walton. Our guest today is a spiritual leader, a man of deep faith, and a tireless advocate for conciliation and cooperation, not only in his professional life, but also how he volunteers his time to serve his community in so many ways. And as if all of that weren't enough, when he retired, he went to law school. Today we visit with Rabbi Alan Sokobin. His life story is a remarkable one, and he keeps adding to it. Rabbi Sokobin, Alan, if I may,
please.
Thank you for sitting down with us today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. You were born in March of 1926.
Correct.
That means that as
I'm in my 91st year.
That's exactly right. I was going to say, as we sit here in the spring of 2016, you just observed a very important milestone birthday. How did you feel about that?
For the first time, I really thought of it's not a birthday. My birthday was 90 years ago. This is the anniversary of my birth.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the first time that I really paid attention to it, because I have always known that life is finite. I was in combat. Take my word for it. I know that life is finite. But I was thinking, because I was with my family, my grandchildren, and I began to think of what could I give my grandchildren that would reflect what I believe in, what I care about. And I'm not talking about religion. There's a difference between faith and religion. Faith is something that I have. Religion is something that was created by a bunch of old men many years ago, and fashioned and formed, and I happen to like it. But I didn't create it. Mm-hmm. Faith created me, and I created it. And so I wanted, so that this anniversary of my birth touched me very, very much.
Why more so than 80 or 70?
Because I thought I was going to go on eternally.
Let's talk a little bit about family history. Your grandparents emigrated to America from Russia.
That was my mother's side, yes.
On your mother's side in the early 1900s. Do you know what motivated them to come to America?
Yeah, survival. It was very simple. I have to go back and tell you who they were and where they came from. My grandfather was born in Kurland. I think I said that to you, which is on the Baltic. His native language was German. Mm-hmm. And but he was under Russian rule, and therefore he was drafted into the Russian army. The Russian army selective service, if you can call it that, was for 25 years. They sent him down to a small town in the Ukraine. The town doesn't exist anymore. We've checked on it. And he found a charming chubby, and she was charming. My grandmother. And how he married her, we don't know, because the army didn't permit it. But he was very...
They weren't permitted to marry?
Apparently not. This is my problem. I wrote a volume of, it's now 3 volumes of memoirs, and it begins with family history. And my family history, I guarantee you, is 50% correct. This was from one aunt, this is from another uncle, this is from someone else. It was all oral history. Therefore, I know it was 50% correct. I don't know which 50%. But that was the way I was told. And so he decided to desert and said, let's go to the United States. And at that point, I don't know whether they had 1 or 2 children. And she said, no, I don't want to leave here. I want to, my mother, my father, my family is here. And my grandfather said, I'm going to the United States. Came to the United States, didn't change his name, but changed the spelling. It was F-U-E-R, as Förster, with the umlaut. And he just became F-E-R-S-T-E-R. And somehow or other, he finagled American papers. Things were a little easier in those days. Mm-hmm. And then he went back to get her again, and she said no. So he came back to the United States again. By this time, she had 3 children. Went back again, and finally they all came, because he would not stay there under those circumstances.
So she was very reluctant to come to this country.
She was reluctant.
Obviously.
She was not reluctant to come to this country. She was reluctant to leave her family.
Yeah. You have to admire that.
Yeah, I do. I really do.
Now, we fast forward a bit, and you were born in Newark, New Jersey. Correct. After the family settled here. Your father was Max.
Yeah.
Your mother, Pauline.
Yeah.
Can you share your memories of your parents?
Yeah. My father was an amazing man. Let's begin there. He had gone into the U.S. Army. That side of the family's in the United States much longer. We don't know when they came. But he had a relative who he called uncle, who was probably a cousin of some sort, who fought in the war between the states. He wasn't very smart. He was in an Alabama regiment. And, I mean, who goes for the losers? And the family history is that my great-great-grandfather fought in the Napoleonic Wars. Oh. And so there is this tradition in the family. My uncle Morris fought in the Spanish-American War. My father went into the Army and was in the cavalry, fought with the Apache Scouts, went down with Pershing into Mexico. And he had, and then he was the 1st Division in France. His discharge papers, in those days, discharge papers told every battle, and he was in every one of them. But my grandfather became ill. I'm guessing from what was told me that it was cancer, and so he left the Army to go into the family business, which I think he hated to the day of his death, the glass business. I was raised in that, and in order to support his sisters. Happily, he met my mother, and thus I was born.
How did they meet?
I don't know. I have a little thing in my memoir, Engaged, Pauline Forster, Max Sokobin. Yeah, that's all I know about it. They never talked.
Did your parents follow Jewish traditions at home?
They were not very observant. My father was firmly Jewish, but intellectually so. He went to every lecture he could go to. When it came to religious services, they went for the high holy days, basically. And that was all. My mother was even less observant and less concerned. But they were both omnivorous readers. And so, and they read many, many things. There weren't as many things about Judaism or Jews in those days. It was only after the Holocaust that there's such a plethora of Jewish literature.
Yeah. What was it like growing up in Newark in the 1930s?
Well, I grew up in what had initially been a suburb that had been absorbed into Newark. And it was a small town by itself, in essence, Vailsburg. And everyone in Vailsburg knew everyone else. All the families knew each other. I remember going to the 1st grade, and the teacher said, "Which one of your relatives have," to the class, "which one of your relatives have I taught?" And I said, "Oh, my cousin Eddie." She said, "Eddie Oleski?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Go to the corner." I'm not making that up.
His reputation preceded you.
Yeah. She knew she assumed if I was from the same family, I had to be the same as he was. And he never changed. He and I, we were in the Navy at the same time. We were college roommates at the time. He never changed.
Did the Depression hit your family hard?
Very hard. I will not eat mac and cheese to this day because we had it at least 3, perhaps 4 times a week. In those days, I thought it was because my mother liked it.
That's a staple of college life today, mac and cheese. But I can understand what you're saying.
Yeah. No, we were poor, very poor. Not as poor, going back to my father, he was 8 years old and he was sent from Newark, where he was born, to Alabama to cousins because he they couldn't afford to feed them.
Hmm.
My grandmother would go to the marshalling yards. In those days, the marshalling yards, the trains would bang against each other in the coal car. Coal would fall to the ground. And like Ruth in the Bible, she would glean and take the coal home to put into the little stove they had. They were poor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's worse than dirt poor.
Yeah. How did it feel to live so close to New York City? You could see it. You could almost reach out and touch it across the river. How was it like growing up with the Big Apple so close by?
I had a very special relationship to it. My mother had, when she got up, she never graduated high school either, but she took a course in, I forget what it's called, but some kind of stenography. And she ended up working at an office in New York for MGM. Their business office was in New York, and their legal office was in New York. So she was a stenographer secretary to the legal counsel there, who signed up all of the actresses and actors. And so I was taken across there from time. I don't remember my first time, but to show, I guess, to show off that she had a child, or to remember the days when she didn't have to worry about me.
Did you get to meet any famous actors, actresses in that connection?
No.
But you spent a lot of time in Manhattan.
Yeah, but we spent time in
Manhattan.
Yeah.
Now, did you have siblings? You had a sister,
my sister, Billy, yeah.
Okay. She was a little younger than you?
She was 3 years younger than I.
Okay. Now, by the time you reached high school, had you figured out yet what you wanted to do with your life?
High school, first of all, I only have 2 years of high school. Because of the war, I went into service.
We'll get to that, yeah.
But no, I was bored by high school. A
lot of people were. I don't think that makes you unique. I think, but
the only course I really liked was the history course. No, I had no idea what I was going to do. First of all, in New Jersey, prior to the war, the only colleges were state colleges. Rutgers was a private college and much too expensive, and Princeton. I came from a community that assumed that no Jew went to Princeton, and in those days, very few did, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly what's going on with the Wilson reputation these days. And no, it was just, I had to go. As a matter of fact, I'm not so sure I should tell you this, but some years later, after I finished college and went to rabbinic school, when I finished rabbinic school, they had a blurb in the New York News, the paper of Alan Sokobin, son of, etc., was just ordained at the Hebrew Union College. And the first call my mother got, a woman started to cry on the telephone and said, "Oh, Mrs. Sokobin, your son, I'm so proud. He's one of my boys who made it." He was my truant officer.
Oh, my goodness.
And then I became friendly with her. She lived in Ocean Grove down on the...
Yeah, you're just a youngster at this point. Those first couple of years of high school, 14, 15.
Yeah.
Did you have a job?
Oh, yes.
What was your first job?
My first job actually was when I was 8 or 9 years old, on Saturday morning going down with my father to the shop, because there was no safety glass in those days.
Mm.
And drivers would slam the driver's door, and the glass would break. So Saturday morning was the time that the cars would be lined up to get glass in that door. And my job was with ammonia in a rag, is to clean it off.
Wow! And you were what, 8? You say 8 years old?
8 years old. I worked in and this one I really liked, an ice cream shop.
Wow!
I particularly liked the pistachio. We bonded. I worked in a clothing shop folding and hanging up and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're talking about high school at times, and of course, as you alluded to, your high school education was interrupted. America entered World War II. Let me ask you first, do you recall December 7th, 1941?
I remember it
Tell us about
as if it were yesterday, as if it was this morning. I had no idea where Pearl Harbor was. It was a blank. But people were turning on their radios loudly. We lived on a street where there was a sense of community, and God forbid somebody wouldn't have heard. And so they're blasting over and over, repeating it. And I went home and asked my dad, where is Pearl Harbor? He said, I think it's in the Philippines or in Hawaii. It's someplace out there. And the impact upon me was much like the impact upon us after 9/11. It was 2 or 3 days later, I think it was 2 days later, I skipped school, which I did from time to time, to enter the service. Why I went to Philadelphia, I do not know, but I went to Philadelphia. There was a line around that city block, that big, big city block, of people waiting to go in to sign up for the military. I was in line for 4 hours, and I finally got to a recruiting officer or what, and his first word to me was, "Where is your birth certificate?" I had to hitchhike back to Newark. And it took me a while. I hadn't even thought about birth certificates. We were talking about a different world for me. I had no idea where it was. If my parents had a birth certificate for me, it took me a while to find it. And when I found it...
You had to go back to Newark?
Oh, yes.
To retrieve it?
I couldn't retrieve it right away because I didn't know where it was.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a couple of months to find it.
Oh.
I didn't leave home, this was December. I didn't leave home to go into service until May. It took me that long first to find it. And I don't remember where it was. It was under something hidden well, but they didn't care. It was
now, on that day in Philadelphia, though, that first day, how old were you?
15.
You were 15 years old.
Yeah.
So you were prepared to fib about your age if necessary.
Oh,
until they asked for the birth certificate.
I tell my grandchildren I've never told a lie.
Well, you had a lot of company there. A lot of young Americans did the very same thing.
So I was 16 because my birthday is in March.
Yeah.
And before I finally found the birth certificate, and had to, I don't want to imply that I was dumb, but I was dumb. I didn't know what to do with it. How do you change a birth certificate? How do you?
You knew it wasn't going to fly.
I knew
in the form it was in.
You wouldn't take me that way. And then I left, and I finally figured out a way to do it.
What was the way to do it?
Well, with all of the brilliance that I had, I hitchhiked up to Montreal because they were taking people at 16. And so I still hadn't done anything to the birth certificate. And with my last dollar, I went to see the Canadiens play. And next to me was a young Canadian soldier who was going to go, had home in Kitchener to see his parents before he went overseas. So he and I went to the marshalling yard and got on I rode the rods. We didn't have any money to pay for anything, he and I. So we, in a boxcar, all the boxcars were going to Detroit to pick up armaments and things from that the Americans were turning out. He jumped off at Kitchener. Actually, it stopped at Windsor. I got off at Windsor, hitchhiked across the bridge. It is my memory, and I'm not going to go back and check it, but it is my memory that it cost a nickel to walk across the bridge in those days. and I didn't have a nickel. So I hitchhiked across, and the truck driver who took me across was a wonderful person. Had a conversation. We talked about where I would do and what I would do. And he took me to the Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army took me in. They were wonderful.
This is Detroit.
Detroit. They got me a job at a restaurant, Schaefer's Restaurant, and at night working. I got to know half of the prostitutes in Detroit at that point. They were there working the room. By that time, I had figured out what to do with my certificate, and I had some help. One of the drunks there helped me with the birth certificate, sobered up enough to walk into the recruiting office with me because it said I was 17, but I still needed a parent's permission to go into. And I taught him how to sign my father's name. Then we got back, and he went back to being a drunk again.
I don't think anybody would criticize you today for all that you went through to serve your country in World War II. That's amazing. That really is. Were you worried about detection after you got into the service?
Yes, I did. I didn't write home. I decided not to write home until I was legally 17, that my parents couldn't get me out. My father, because he'd been in the service so much, knew how to get around things. And they found out where I was. At that point, I was out of...
You hadn't told your mom and dad that you were in the Army?
No, oh no, I was afraid they'd pull me out.
Right.
And I was done with boot camp. I did boot camp in just north of Chicago, Great Lakes. And they sent me to the University of Wisconsin for a program. And I was in that program at the University of Wisconsin, and my mother came. And after a long and tearful, believe me, tearful on both sides, conversation, she signed and permitted me to stay in the service. So I was 16 and a half at that point.
She could have pulled you out.
She could have pulled me out.
She did not.
No.
Yeah. Now, you were assigned at one point to a battleship, USS Wyoming?
Yeah. But
is that right?
Yeah. That was for a very short period of time.
Okay.
That was the War of Chesapeake Bay. It was used. It was a World War I battleship that was used for training gunnery officers.
But did you see combat?
Not there.
Okay. How and when did
in Chesapeake Bay, all you see is all I did was hear. I mean, all day long the
shelling,
the guns. Yeah.
But you did get into a combat situation. Tell us about that.
I was on the Boise, and we, which was a cruiser, which is the next level down of battleships and cruisers and whatever. They're all just floating artillery. And we were at Morocco for, I think it was called Operation Torch, when first the French were shooting at us and then changed their mind and shot in the other direction. So all the way I did. So I was in Morocco and Algiers. Oran is a gorgeous harbor. Then as far as then into Sicily, and then into Italy, and at that point I was sent back to the States.
Do you remember the first time you were in a combat situation?
Yes.
What were you feeling? What was going on?
When one uses the term "as scared as hell," hell has to be very deep.
It would apply here,
Yes.
in other words. Yes.
Yeah.
Here you were just a kid. Were you still just 17 when that was going on?
Yeah, I was 17 at that point.
Hard for to imagine a 17-year-old today that thrust into that situation.
Yeah. I mean, suddenly I realized that, and not there, it was later on at Salerno in Italy. The guy next to me was shredded by shrapnel. Yeah.
Did you lose friends?
Yes.
And
Well, the answer is yes and no. We had best friends for when we were there.
mm-hmm.
They were that was the only friendship and family we had. We created a small community, but that was later. When I first went in, the Wyoming was when I say regular Navy, I was one of the first reservists after Pearl Harbor, and the old-time regular Navy people were miserable human beings. The worst anti-Semites I've ever met
Really?
in my life.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to the Boise, I became a rather good boxer.
Mm-hmm.
It was a response.
Yeah, yeah. How long did your service last?
Well, then I went after I came back. I was on a destroyer escort,
mm-hmm.
and that was wonderful. I was the only Jew, about 100 fellows on that, including the officers and the enlisted personnel. But they were all reservists. They were human beings who had come from small towns.
Much better treatment of your.
We treated each other
mm-hmm.
as friends dealing with things. And I met my best friend there. He was my chief. And we maintained a relationship until his death.
Mm-hmm.
Even we only saw each other twice in some 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was in California and I was in the East, but we maintained a correspondence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your military years ended when?
I was one of the first to be discharged because they had a point system. I'm going to tell you the story. My daughter Sharon, you know Sharon, she loved this story. She just heard it recently. I never told it before. How I hitchhiked back from Japan. We were among the first. We escorted troop ships for the occupation of Japan, and the skipper called me up to the bridge, and Sokobin became Soko in the Navy. Everyone had a shortened name or nickname. He said, "We have a problem. You have enough points because of all you got points for time overseas, combat, decorations, all kinds of things." And so he said, "You have enough points to be discharged, but we can't send you because we have to wait for your replacement." He said, "But we can't." He said, "But we don't need your replacement. The war is over." So he said,
"It sounds like military logic."
Yeah. You know. He said, "It was nice knowing you. See the yeoman." Yeoman was the clerk. I went to the yeoman. The yeoman handed me an envelope with all of my papers from the day I enlisted. He said, "Well, it was nice knowing you." So I went up and down the wharfs looking for, but there was only one way the vessels could go, which was east. So I was looking for the one that was leaving quickest, and I found one. I went aboard, avoiding the officers' area, found an enlisted men of roughly my level. Can you sneak me on? No problem. I was on that. It took me to Guam. We get to Guam.
So you were a stowaway to come home?
If you want to use that term, we get to Guam, and Guam was loaded with troop ships for the Marines. And the Marines, so I get on one of those, and Marines were the most arrogant people in the world, never mind just in the service. But because I had enough combat experience, they accepted me. They dealt with me as if I were a puppy, but they accepted me. And yes, they said, "You can come on here." It was a sergeant who did it naturally, and so we pulled into Portland, Oregon, and they said to the Marines, "Tomorrow morning, you all have to be at the train station." And they gave them numbers for which train to take, California, Texas, New York, whatever, to be discharged. But tonight you can go into Portland. And I learned something that I loved, that I found fascinating. that Portland had more breweries than any other city in the United States. Now, we go off that evening, a small group, maybe 6 or 7 of us, all Marines and me. And I'm making up the number. We go into a bar and it says, this is brewery number 27. They said, oh, good, there are only 26 more.
Oh my gosh.
And we did. But I'm a one beer man. I had a beer in 27 and accompanied them to 26 and 25 and 24, etc. The next morning, this is here is one of the most beautiful memories in my life. Here I am with a sea bag on one shoulder, schlepping a Japanese rifle that I had, pushing these inert bodies onto the right train. They had no idea where they were. They had been in Okinawa. They had been in Guadalcanal. They weren't going to get on that train sober. I got them all on. I found the train that was going to New York. I got on it. Nobody was looking for tickets. These were all troop trains.
What would those guys have done without you? Or they might have enlisted for another 10 years or something.
They'd still be in the Marine. So we get to Chicago, and there was a young ensign. I mean, his gold shone. And where are your travel orders? Oh, sir, I could out-sir anyone in the world. I've been in almost 4 years. I knew the system.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'll find somebody. He turned around. I was gone. I was on another train. Got to New York. Got to where they were discharging people.
You slipped away when he wasn't looking?
Yep. I got to where they were discharging people someplace in Long Island, and the yeoman who's getting ready to discharge me says, "I can't discharge you. You don't have travel orders." He says, "But I can give you a notice of separation. You stay in the reserves." So I stayed in the reserves. They tried to call me back during Korea, but by that time I was in the rabbinic school and got out of it.
So all of that convoluted trip home kind of really cost you a complete separation from the service. You ended up serving a few more years as a reservist?
As a reservist,
okay.
Yeah. But
okay.
No place. Actually, reserves in those days was to go to a meeting and get a little money.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't sound very patriotic, but it was true.
Your service sounds very patriotic to me, sir.
Yeah. Nobody called me sir.
I know. Now we can, and I feel obligated to do so.
And if you want to know something, I have, the kind of junk you have. But the one that I don't have is the one that I'm proudest of. I did not get a good conduct medal.
Well, it sounds like the manner in which you came home from the service, I'm not sure you earned one. What year would that have been?
Well, that was December of 45. The war was just over.
You came back and
I was the first to be discharged.
Yeah, and it was time to go back to high school, in effect.
Yeah.
But not where you had started, right? You went into the city to Rhodes?
It took a while before I found Rhodes. Everything was in turmoil. Mm-hmm. And Rhodes was a very good private school that decided to get GED money from the government.
Mm-hmm. So your service helped pay for your time at Rhodes.
There, yeah.
What did you study there?
They offered history, typing.
Was the campus in Manhattan?
Yeah,
the high school.
It was right behind MoMA, right behind the Museum of Art and Art.
Oh, sure.
Their garden was across the street.
Okay.
And I didn't graduate from there. I still don't have a diploma, because one of their courses was how to get into college, and how to apply, and how to take they didn't call it the SATs in those days. It was the Princeton College entrance something or other. And they gave us the form, and we were to bring the form back into the class and go over it. And the form included an essay and some other things. Well, I must have been looking at one of the girls. I didn't bring it back in. I mailed it to Princeton. And on there it said what, and by the way, in those days you had to put religion, you had to put everything on the form. It said put the names of colleges you want to go to, you're applying for on that form. And I put Syracuse. I had no idea where Syracuse was, but I knew that my cousin had a cousin who had gone to Syracuse. I put Lehigh because of what I had done in the Navy. I thought I'd go into engineering. I thought of electrical engineering. And I put Wisconsin because that's what the Navy had sent me for that program. I was so good at that program that the top sailors in that program were kept on to become electrical engineers. They sent me to sea. But in any case, 2 of the 3 accepted me. Lehigh and Syracuse accepted me.
How'd you make a decision?
Easy, because I got a call. Remember, I just said religion. I got a call at midnight because our telephone numbers and everything were on it, from a fellow who was 6 months ahead of me, out of the service, and he was working at part-time. We all had, even with GI Bill, you had to work. One had to work. He was working cleaning offices, and he was in the Dean of Admissions office, and he saw my name, my folder was on top, that I was to be accepted. And he asked me, are you, and he was Jewish. And he said, are you going into mining engineering? I said, no, I'm interested in electrical. And he said, well, you're accepted someplace else? I said, yeah, I've been accepted, not in engineering, but just accepted into Syracuse, into their general program. He said, go there. I said, why? He said, because they only accept 1 Jew a year into the mining program, mining engineering program. And if you come here and you take his place and you're not interested in mining engineering.
Boy, talk about another time, another era.
It was a very different era.
Yeah.
So
that was your major then when you got to Syracuse?
No, I went into general studies and quickly forgot about engineering.
Oh, okay.
I only had one major math course. I think they should turn off the microphones on this one. The professor had been in the service. We were all GIs. I'll get to that. The school went, and I really don't know the numbers, but it went from 5,000 to 15,000 overnight, 10,000 GIs.
Yeah. And
so we get in that course, and he says, this is the most important math course you're going to be taking here. This is spherical trigonometry. I didn't even know what spherical trigonometry was. He said, this is the basic course for navigation. And therefore, I'm going to teach all of you how to navigate so well that from any place in the world, you can bomb the shit out of Moscow. You'll cut that out, please?
It's not necessary. Yeah.
It was a very different world.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever get used to those upstate New York winters?
I was young. I didn't know the difference.
Yeah.
I drank a lot of hot coffee.
After Syracuse came an important life decision. You enrolled at Hebrew Union College?
Not quite. Not that
came
simple.
along, and that's in Cincinnati, right?
Yeah.
What was something in between there?
I was thinking of going into the Foreign Service. I had an uncle who had been in the American Foreign Service, got to be a consul general. And so I went, but in those days, everything was by interview. And so I went into Boston, I interviewed at Tufts for the Fletcher School. And my grades were okay, so they said they'd pretty much take me. And I was on the bus back to Syracuse, and I said to myself, that's not what I want. We were beginning, the newsreels were showing the shots of the Holocaust. The newsreels were showing the desperate fighting by the Israelis to stay alive. And I'm going back to Syracuse, and I said, I don't want that. I want to be a Jew. And the only I didn't say I want to be a rabbi.
Uh-huh.
I said, I want to be a Jew. And in those days, the only academic course that existed was rabbinic school. So I said, okay, I'll get that too, but I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I want to be a Jew. I was just lucky. I backed into the rabbinate.
Why Ohio and why Hebrew Union?
This is a bit of a simplification, but true. I was accepted in the school in New York as well. And why Hebrew Union? Because I had no Hebraic background to speak of. And that's essential. And I said to myself, if I go to New York, I'm going to be on 59th Street at Ryan's Jazz Club 4 times a week.
There's going to be beer nearby, in other words.
Well, the one beer.
One beer.
I better go to the most boring city in the United States, so I'll have time to study. And so I went to Cincinnati. Now, that's an oversimplification, but yeah, that was a part of it.
I got to ask, did you find Cincinnati to be boring?
The first, it was a 6-year program. I did it in 5. I'd been in service. I had to hurry. I did college in 3. The first 2 years, I did nothing but study. At the end of 2 years, they had an examination. It was called a BHL, Bachelor of Hebrew Letters. They didn't even give me a certificate. They said you would now have another degree. But that was the cutoff. I started with 41, and 19 of us continued. It was a very difficult academic program. And once I passed the BHL, then I could take a little time to enjoy myself.
Mm-hmm. Now, during your studies in Cincinnati, you came to learn about Toledo.
Yes.
And you interviewed for a job at the temple congregation Shomer Emunim.
Uh-huh.
You got it. And you began making weekend trips up to the city
on weekends
to work. What were your duties up here?
Youth group, Sunday school. I helped found the young marrieds group. My predecessor, Rabbi Foyer, was then the senior rabbi, and I miss him, a man of impeccable standards. At any rate, but he was not the kind of rabbi who could work well with a youth group, or that he was a lecturer, an academic mind. We didn't have PBS, and so the congregation was the place for communicating to the community those elements that were both a part of the American scene and the Jewish scene, and melding them in some way. I mentioned my father. That's what he was looking for in synagogues.
Yeah. Now, you were ordained as a rabbi in 1955.
Yeah.
Your first rabbinic post was at a temple on Long Island. So you went back to New York State.
I went back.
Can you describe your emotions? You finished your education, formal education, finally.
No, I did not. That was one of the reasons I went to that congregation. I wanted to sign up for a doctorate.
Okay.
And the 2 schools that offered something what I was looking for were Columbia and NYU. Now, I didn't know that there were schools in California. So I wanted, and I enrolled at NYU.
So you were at NYU
my slip of the tongue, at Columbia.
Columbia, and working in your first rabbinic assignment. What was it like when you walked in on day one, and now your title is rabbi?
A very simple, true, 100% true story. A woman came in to me and said, Rabbi, my husband died. He's buried. We have to have an unveiling. Oh, where? Such and such a cemetery. I wrote it down. What time? Such and such a thing. And she left, and then I picked up the phone and called her, an older rabbi on Long Island, and said, "What's an unveiling?" I had no idea.
That hadn't been covered?
No, they didn't teach me how to be a practical rabbi. They gave me academics.
Mm-hmm.
In those days, the school was academically oriented. The first time I knew about a wedding ceremony was because when I was a student, there was a friend of mine who was married in Cleveland. And so I went up there, and because I was a rabbinic student, the rabbi was very kind to me and permitted me to assist him. I didn't even know where to look in the prayer book for it.
Wow. Yeah. In other words, the hands-on, practical, internship type instruction wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
I assume you got through that obligation in good shape, though.
I survived.
The elder helped you through it, and, but it was an awakening of sorts.
Yes.
There's more to this than I thought.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I got to Laurelton, which was the first congregation, everything was new to me. I had given 2 sermons at the school that were required. 2.
That's it.
And they were very academically written. The only reason I knew what a funeral was that one of my classmates, his wife, gave birth to a dead child. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I learned the laws of dealing with that. We didn't cover that.
Yeah. About 2 years into your rabbinic time, 1957, I think, you married your wife, Miriam. Can you tell us how the two of you met?
I applied. I knew that I have to say it very gently. I was a graduate of the Hebrew Union College, where most of this, or many of the courses were in Hebrew or Aramaic, but I was not the top student in those subjects. Mm-hmm. I was given the opportunity, it was out of heaven, the opportunity to apply for a year in Israel studying there toward my doctorate. And I had the letter telling me that I would get this money and where I should show up was in English. But then I had to fill out forms in Hebrew for the school there. And if there is something that is true, I will not turn in something that has not been well edited. I'm almost spelling dyslexic. I really am, mm-hmm. in Hebrew and in English. And I had a friend, I'm still a friend, who was going with an Israeli girl who was working at the Israeli Department of Defense purchasing office in New York. They would buy pieces for helicopters or trucks or whatever. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what they were. So I went up to her to help me with the Hebrew. I didn't want to go to Israel looking like an utter idiot. And at another desk in that office, there was this blonde, blue-eyed, gorgeous, interesting, fascinating young lady.
I'll bet her name was Miriam.
Her name. Called Mickey. Nobody ever called her Miriam except people who don't know her. And I took her out on the first, to call it a date is overdoing it. I took her to lunch. Why? Because I was at school at night. Mm-hmm. Funny thing is, she was at NYU every evening. I was at Columbia, and she was at so I took her out. The second date became a real date. And that's when I knew. I quoted Emerson to her, and she corrected my quote. True. And I said, any Israeli who knows Emerson better than I do.
That sealed the deal right there.
Yeah, that was.
And 2 years after your marriage, in 1959, your daughter, Sharon, was born, and 2 years after that, your son Jonathan, was born. How did parenthood affect you?
Mickey is a superb mother. She didn't do 51%. She did much more than that. But the way it affected me more than any other was the sense that up until this time, I had no obligation for anyone but myself. Suddenly, there's this human being whose existence is in my hands. There's a human being that is totally dependent for survival and growth and development, both physically and intellectually and morally. And I have to pay attention to that. I don't think, and this is an oversimplification perhaps, but only perhaps, I don't think people grow up until they have the responsibility for another person. I think we grow, we learn things, we adapt to things, but I don't think we really know what maturity is until we have an obligation for someone else. And the obligation is not always with a husband and wife, as we can tell from divorce statistics. But a child changes everything.
Yeah. Later came service at temples. I think you went back to New Jersey, Bloomfield, was it?
Yeah, that was very temporary.
And Elmont, New York, I think, also for a time.
14 years. No, that was a real congregation. Yeah. Bloomfield was simply a place to go. We came back from Israel. We didn't know where to go, what to do. It was close to my family in New Jersey.
Okay, but all the while you're in New Jersey and then Elmont, New York, I'm guessing Toledo must have been in the back of your mind.
No.
Were you thinking at all about ever returning to Toledo?
No. When I was asked to come, we don't have a hierarchy. We have no one who tells us where to go. Every rabbi is free to go wherever he or can or will.
You're not assigned in a sense that a lot
not at all.
Clergy
we have an office in New York. A congregation will send in a request. We're looking for a rabbi. These are the qualities we want. He should be young, handsome, great with kids, and the most articulate human being you ever met. And beside that, he should be somewhat intelligent.
Sounds like they wanted you.
Then the rabbis put into their, sent to the, I'm looking for a congregation, anyone that'll support me and is willing to tolerate me. I got a call. They like to put together, there was only one person in the office, he and the secretary, put together a panel of 5. And I got a call from the director of placement. Alan, Toledo is looking for a congregation, and I want to put your name on. I said, no, I'm not interested in Toledo. They are very far left ritually in observance. I am in the middle. I'm much more traditional than they are. And I'm looking for a more traditional congregation. He said, well, we have a problem. They added all kinds of conditions to the request for a rabbi. They want somebody who will who can teach part-time at the university because they consider that to be a part of their offering to the community. They must have an earned doctorate. They want somebody who is a fluent Hebraist. Well, as I pointed out to you when I graduated from Hebrew Union College, I was a Hebraist, but not a fluent Hebraist. Will not officiate at intermarriages, which was a big, and continues to be in some measure, an issue in the Jewish community. I don't remember all of them. At any rate, he said, we only have 4 in the panel. We need a 5th with all of these requirements. They said, besides, you've been there, you know the people, be nice to go out there. So I come out somewhat open. About 2 p.m, after a full discussion with the selection committee, I said, "This is not for me. I am much more traditional."
They were more of a reform,
Yeah,
Judaism.
yeah, and I'm much more traditional. This is not for me. And it was Lynn Jacobs. I don't know if you know Lynn, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
And Lynn Jacobs, who said, "But we want change. Otherwise, we wouldn't be interviewing you." I still didn't think so. I still didn't want it. That evening, there was a garden party to meet not only the rest of the board, some of the more active members of the congregation, and several of the people. I can give you their names. I remember it as if it were yesterday. One said, "Oh, we don't have the restaurants that you have in New York, but this is a great place to raise children." The second person said, "Oh, we don't have the opera that you have in New York. We have a great place to raise children." The third said, and I don't have to go through.
Were you sensing a pattern here?
Yeah. But on the plane back to New York, I was thinking, I have a 13-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, and things were not going well in raising teenagers in New York at that time. Mm-hmm. They called me at 7 the next morning, and I said yes. I must admit, during the first 2 or 3 years, there were times I regretted it. But it has turned out to be the most wonderful city for me and for my children. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, my Mickey said, not quite, this is a misquote, but I like it. I said, going to Toledo, she said, "What's a Toledo?"
I assume she made the adjustment.
She made the adjustment.
As did your children.
When we drove out to come here with the children in the car, and we were coming, and they were then just paving Route 80 and onto the road, off to side roads to get back on again because it wasn't completed. And we came to what was called a rest area, and it was 2 holes in the ground. And Mickey said, "Where are you taking me?"
So, but Toledo quickly became your home, and did you find that recruiting pitch was accurate, that they were looking for change at Shomer?
Yeah, the answer is both yes and no. Some were looking for change, and all of those who were looking for change didn't know what change they wanted. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the realistic response.
Mm-hmm. You still characterize your rabbinic service as middle of the road?
Oh, very much so.
Not orthodox, not true reform.
No, I'm someplace in the middle. Mm-hmm. I belong to both the reform and the conservative rabbinic groups. Mm-hmm. I don't pay dues anymore after 50 years here.
You're grandfathered in, I guess. Huh? You've served on many community boards, too, and we talked about your volunteerism a bit earlier in the introduction, but one that caught my eye, and which I always was fascinated with too, was the Labor Management Citizens Committee, the old LMC. I don't know if there was a more, in the time you were a member, I don't know if there was a more important organization in our town, because labor strife was common in those days, as you know. But why was LMC so important to you?
Because it seems to me that we fight with our hands, but we make agreements with our minds and our mouths. Mm-hmm. And this was a way to get people to put their hands behind them and to work at something. I truly believe, and I've done a lot of mediation. I did it in juvenile court. I did it there. I always begin by saying something like, if you want to be totally satisfied, then fight it out. One of you will be totally satisfied. If you're willing to be almost satisfied, we can work out something that both of you will walk away with no blood.
that was always the best labor contract, was the one where nobody was totally satisfied.
Yeah.
You also enjoyed close relationships with clergy of other faiths, and perhaps most prominently Bishop James Hoffman. Can you talk about that friendship?
Jim Hoffman and I began knowing each other because we were both on many committees together. And we would get together from time to time to think about how we might not just sit there, but impact from a religious point of view on the activities of the committee. Now, I have to take a step back. Religion and faith are two very separate things in my mind. Faith is something that comes within ourselves and the way we look at the world. Religion was created by a bunch of old men many years ago, some of which we like and some of which we don't like, but we follow because we like tradition. At least I speak of myself.
There's that academic thing again.
Yeah. And so we would get together, always at breakfast, and we got to the point where we talked to each other about what was real, about what we cared about. I told him the story of Lehigh, of that kind of thing. I told him that when I grew up in Vailsburg, 51 weeks of the year, I was a friend to everyone in my age group. We lived across the street from a park, and we go into the park to play. I was always picked to be on a team. I might have been the last to be picked, but I was always picked to be on a team. One week I was not, and that was the week prior to Easter, when they wouldn't talk to me, and some of them even hit me. Why? Because the local priest had said that in some way I had created, or I had actually killed Jesus, that I had created that situation in some way. And we talked about these things. He and I had a conversation which turned out to be the most wonderful conversation in the world. Almost word for word. How we got into it, I don't remember, but I do remember precisely what happened. I said to him, during the Holocaust, if Hitler had said, one child, one couple, the way the Chinese do, therefore, if a woman becomes pregnant, she must have an abortion, I said every priest in Germany would have been on the street corner. No question about it. I said there were wonderful people who saved Jews. There is in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, where there's a long path with trees, and each tree, because trees, the tree of life, trees represent life to us in the future, with a name on it of someone who saved Jews. I said, but you would have been on street corners. You were not on street corners. I got a call a week later. I'm trying to think of the name of the sister. I don't remember. The bishop told me about your conversation. We want to set up courses in Holocaust history in the Catholic school system.
Wow.
We were the first diocese maybe in the world, but certainly in the United States, that set that up. Because Jim Hoffman said to the sister who ran the schools, we have to respond to that. Mm-hmm. We set up a committee. Margie Romanoff, I don't know if you know the Romanoff family, but Margie Romanoff, at PhD in education, she represented our group, how to do it educationally. They had a committee. It took them a year to put it together, but this diocese has it.
What a remarkable example of interfaith cooperation. We were talking about your strong commitment to interfaith cooperation, and but at the same time, you disagreed with the concept of interfaith marriages,
Correct.
as you mentioned a bit earlier. Why is that?
We are not just a religion. We are a people. Mm-hmm. We are a people. I'm a direct descendant of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I'm a descendant of Judah and Benjamin. My wife is a descendant of the tribe of Levi. We are a people with our own religion. And our religion is the religion that gave two things to the Western world. Abraham said there's one God, and one God means, in those days, the Sumerians said, our God created us, and the Babylonians said, our God created us, and therefore they were different people. One God means that we are all one people, that we are first and second and third cousins to everybody in the world. I mean, I can't throw that away. That's a prideful tradition. Moses, now, again, because I studied law, I focus in on this, or perhaps I went to study law because this is important to me. Moses said something about law. Every community has law. Nazi Germany had law. Mm-hmm. Stalin's Russia had law. Moses' law was moral, was ethical. Mm-hmm. Moses' law has something the United States doesn't have. It's the most repeated law in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, is you and the same law shall be for you and the sojourner who lives with you. Everybody got a green card the minute they came into the community. They were required to obey the law, and therefore they were treated with respect and integrity. After the so-called 10 Commandments, there's 613 commandments. What is the 11th one? The 11th one has to do with, it's the Eved Ivri, and it's translated as the Hebrew slave, but he wasn't a slave. He was for 6 years, what's the term? Benjamin Franklin was one, help me. I forget the term in English. I'm sorry.
That's all
right. He was not a slave. He could sit at the table with the employer and eat. He could say to the employer, "I'm tired." He was tied there for 6 years, but the 7th he went free, totally free. He had his integrity as a human being. This is a tradition that is precious, and it's a tradition that must continue. I don't know what's going to happen to our solar system, but when it does, I want the last one to be on this earth is to be a Jew who says, "I am proud of from whence I came."
Now, another tradition: rabbis traditionally were men, and I think you were a bit more open-minded, perhaps, than many on that. In fact, one of your congregants, Maria Feldman, you encouraged to become a rabbi.
Absolutely. As I said before, religion was created by men. They said, this you can eat, that you can't eat, this is the time for the service, this is the time, what do you wear, the talit, the prayer shawl. None of that is faith, and none of that is intellectualism, and none of that is caring. That's the mechanism for teaching these things. But why? I know it better than my wife. I know it better than my daughter. I know it better than Rabbi Feldman. No. Matter of fact, I think she knows it better than I do. And I mean that. This is not a casual thing. By the way, she and I disagree about ritual.
There you go. What sort of person do you think, Rabbi, does it take to be clergy, regardless of faith?
I am not clergy. I am a teacher.
Must you be a teacher before you can be a clergyman?
No, a rabbi, the word rabbi means teacher. Mm-hmm. I was not called to serve God. I'm not a priest representing God. Mm-hmm. I am a teacher of the Jewish tradition of which God is at the top. I am not, American society has made a clergyman out of me. Jewish law does not require a rabbi to officiate at a wedding. Jewish law does not require a rabbi to officiate at a funeral. That's American practices that we have accepted, not because we're part of a society. But no, my function is to teach Jews how to be Jews.
Okay. And you did that very, very well, because congregation Shomer Emunim.
By the way, we're the only congregation in the world with the name. It means keeper of the faith.
Guardian of the faith?
Guardian of the faith.
It's now 140 years old. I think it was formally established, in 1875.
Yeah.
140th anniversary recently. That must be a source of pride for you to watch this progress and this growth and this longevity.
Oh, there's no question about it. There are things in our lives that not only touch our lives, but give pride to them. And that congregation is a very prideful one. It has served its community, the Jewish community, very well. It has served the general community very well. I pointed out that when one of the things they wanted from a rabbi was to be able to teach part-time at the university, to show that they were a part of the community.
Yeah. Now, the congregation, I think initially was located in the near downtown.
Yes.
A long time ago, and then the old West End for a time.
Where the theater is, that was the building.
Okay. And then in the early 70s, it moved to a beautiful new facility out in Sylvania.
Yes.
Why was the move to the suburbs deemed necessary?
Because the people were moving to the suburbs. The congregation, the building is simply a place to bring the people together. Look at the names. It is called a synagogue. Now, I didn't major in Greek, but I can tell you that means a place where people come together. It is called, sometimes it is called a temple, because that's the place where worship is. And sometimes it's called a shul, which means is the Yiddish or German word for school. It is all three. My grandfather in Rahway, New Jersey, my grandfather was even more pedantic than anyone I've ever met in my life. My grandfather would say to my grandmother, I'm going to go to the, and he would say it not in English, the temple, but it was a one-room building. He would go there for a lecture. He would go there to pray. He would go there to meet with his buddies and play cards. It's all three. It's a place where the people come together to do the things that people can, sometimes should, but want to do.
There's another aspect of your life I want to touch on, and it involves me to an extent. I remember processing letters to the editor from you over the years, including one quite lengthy letter, taking one of our Saturday essayists to task one time. You are an excellent writer. I knew when your letters came in, they didn't need much attention. They didn't need to be edited much in any way. You're a very prolific writer. I would guess your list of published writings is as long as your arm. You enjoyed the craft of writing.
Yes.
Didn't you? You still do.
I still do.
What was its appeal?
That one can return to it. One cannot return to a sermon. A sermon is like a great meal. It's tasty, it's wonderful, and then it's gone. If it's writing, as a matter of fact, I wrote a parable prayer for children, and just yesterday, quite by accident, I had forgotten about it, totally forgotten about it. I brought it up because of some problems that I'm having with my computer. And I looked at it and said, oh, isn't that wonderful? This is young couple I'm going to bring it to, because it says something about raising children that I think is important. I couldn't do that if I'd done it in a sermon or a lecture. They're gone.
But what you write endures. Yep.
If somebody, it's there to be read. My wife pointed out today, I don't know if you saw the New York Times today, on the front page they found shards in Aramaic, and I don't know. I was on the way out of the house, and I'm not quite sure, but she was very excited. It proved something about the Bible being written in Israel, the Torah. And I mean, that shard speaks. The fellow who wrote it, by the way, it proves that Jews were always literate. Up until Martin Luther, who I think was the greatest revolutionary in Christianity, up until Martin Luther, most Christians were illiterate. Charlemagne, that phrase that you may know, there is no royal road to learning, was told he was an illiterate. 97% of the people of the world, of the Western world, were, except for the Jews. Every Jew has to be literate. And here we're talking about 1,000 years BCE. It says, you shall write them upon the doorposts of your house, in Deuteronomy someplace. I never remember the chapter and verse.
But you also, and I have to admit, you took the blade to task on a number of occasions when we had reported or perhaps editorialized in a way that you disagreed with. So you weren't afraid to take on the newspaper, and I respected and admired you for that.
I was told not to do it by many, because they said, how can you argue with an institution that has a truckload of ink?
By ink by the truckload, yes.
No. I don't know that I know I'm not always right. And if you don't believe me, ask the members of my family. But if I think I'm right, I want to, and I think that someone else, it depends on how you say it. You know, I can say to you quite easily, oh, you're obese. Or I can say to you, well, you put on a little, but you're still good looking. You know, it depends on the way you say it.
Conciliator again.
No.
And you, yeah. You retired in, I guess, what, in 1993? Was it after
1993,
four decades or so as a rabbi? You then did what anybody would do in their mid-60s after a full career. You went to law school at the University of Toledo. And I guess the obvious question is why?
Well, one, because it was there. Two, because again, people think that rabbinic school is theological. I had one course or 1 year of theology which I did not understand then, and I do not understand now, because theology is what somebody else thinks about God, and I know what I think about God, and it is not what they think. Judaism is very command-oriented. We'll talk about the commandments. We're very legally oriented. And so this law school, after the first year was awful, because I didn't know how to study anymore. I knew how to read and know how to think, but I didn't know how to study, and I had to relearn that. But once I was past that, it was wonderful, because it was like going to rabbinic school without having to do it in Hebrew and Aramaic.
Doing it in English would be tough enough for me, law school. What was your intent? To pursue
not to become a lawyer. I did it to study. I love to tell this little story. My daughter Sharon, who went to law school before me, at my graduation party, said, "What does one give to a father who graduates when he's 70? A desk set? He has a desk set. Something to carry his papers around in? He doesn't need that, no." She said, "So we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take out a full-page ad in the telephone book, in the yellow section, with his picture, and it will say, if you want a lawyer who majored in independent studies, this is your man."
And they did?
No, they didn't.
Oh. You put the kibosh on that.
It was too expensive and I didn't want them to do it. But I kind of wish they had.
So you never really actively practiced?
Oh, yes, I did.
You had your own...
No. I did 14 years down in juvenile court representing abused children.
Okay.
Because of that, I have a couple of things that are rather interesting. I know more prostitutes and more druggies than most people.
I bet you got to know Judge Andy Devine also.
Very well, very well.
A strong advocate for parenting.
Yes. And a man I respect immensely. I also...
and a man who sat in that chair for this conversation. Yeah.
And I just recently, and maybe I should have brought that picture, one of the kids that I represented, who I saved. Now, I represented, I have no idea, 1,000. 14 years, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 in a family. And this one, CSB and I disagreed with regard to the direction this should be taken with regard to that child. And I fought, screamed and fought. And I finally won and was given to a maiden aunt, raised by that maiden aunt. And he just sent me a picture. He and his best friend, who was also a youngster that I represented in court, got their Eagle Scout Award.
Wow.
I cried. I really cried.
Eventually, though, you went back to the university, or at some point, to become a teacher.
I had done it. I taught in the history. I taught in the history department from '73, I think it was, until after '97. I gave up history because they asked me to teach in the College of Law.
Mm-hmm. And what did you teach at?
Jewish law.
Jewish law.
Yeah, which is a fascinating thing for the College of Law to have wanted to be taught, because it's not on the bar exam. Mm-hmm. And so, my very bad joke, but not a joke, is really true. I only had 2 groups of students. Those who were so smart they knew they were going to pass the bar. They could take something that was very different and very interesting and they would not practice. And those who were those smart. And then the other half were those who thought they were so smart. I loved it because Jewish law is very different from Anglo-American law. Anglo-American law is really law and order. There's no question about it.
How does Jewish law differ from that?
It's not interested in law and order. It's interested in making a better world.
Okay.
It starts with a very different philosophy. Different systems of law, I mentioned before, Hitler's system of law had a different philosophy. Jewish law is concerned with how can we make it better.
You've been to Israel many times.
Yeah.
It's a fraction the size of Ohio, Israel.
About the size of New Jersey.
About New Jersey, or square miles of Lake Erie, about the same. It's surrounded by a lot of people who don't like it. Do you worry about Israel's future?
It brings to mind one of my favorite little jokes about Israel, that Moses looking over across the Jordan and saying, "Oh God, thank you, God. We're going to have a land of milk and honey. It is going to be the most wonderful thing." And God said, "Don't thank me. Wait till you meet who your neighbors are." Do I fear for? Do I have concern for, but not fear for? I have immense concern, because the neighbors, some have not gotten any better. Iran is perhaps even worse, and Iran has something that it didn't have when Israel was born. I mean, the day after Israel was born, it was attacked by 5 Arab nations to push it into the sea and to kill everyone. That was their goal. The War of Independence, they call it the Nakba, the tragedy.
Yeah.
They're a tragedy because they didn't win, because they didn't kill everyone and push the nation into the sea. No, I have concern, but no, not fear, because I have faith in the ability. Stop and think for a second. When I first went to Israel in '57, now it was created in '48. Mm-hmm. It still had rationing. I went to what was the biggest company in the area. They had one company for making clothing, one company for making glass, factories. I mean, today you go down the main road. There's Microsoft. There's Sony. Apple. It is the second largest producer. The second largest producer of technological. Yes. Many of the things that we have, the cell phone we use, was essentially created in Israel.
And most Americans not get that. They don't understand the success story that Israel, modern Israel, is.
Most Americans watch sports.
So I guess that's the answer to the question. Your children, we haven't talked much about Sharon and Jonathan. I'd like to include them here if you would.
Oh,
and then you know what follows that, grandchildren. But talk about those kids.
They are so different. Stop and think about it. Mickey comes from a mathematically oriented family. Her father was chief accountant for Barclays Bank in Tel Aviv. Her brother is an economist, #1 class in the Hebrew University. Her other brother trades money for an Israeli bank. Her grandfather, who came to Israel in 1880, was a banker of a sort. I'd seen the sort because things were so different in Bulgaria in those days. That's her genes. I have a son who's an economist, PhD from the University of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I have a daughter who's a president of a bank. Mm-hmm. So obviously, all the brains came from my wife's side.
Apparently.
So she knew more than Emerson.
I wouldn't sell yourself too short, though. I think you had something to do with all that.
And I have 2 grandchildren graduating this year from OSU in the out of the business school there, which is a very difficult school. One is going to Chicago as an accountant. The other is going to work for Oracle in Boston. No, the brains come from the other side.
Are there other grandchildren, or those 2?
No, there are 4 boys, and finally we got a girl. Thank God.
Wow. And they're so much fun.
They're wonderful.
A joy in your life, I'm sure. I know how busy you still are at age 90, and in your 91st year, as you indicated. But do you have some hobbies when you do have spare time?
My spare time is reading, and not just sometimes it's so heavy I'm embarrassed. I'm now reading Suetonius for the second time. I read it in college. About the 12 Caesars. And
well, I understand, though, you might have some hidden talents you aren't telling us about. You're an expert at blowing up balloons.
Oh, yes.
And making balloon animals for children. I bet your grandkids love that.
Yeah.
You bringing them with you? Oh, my God.
I always had.
Can we ask?
You want? Oh, yes.
Yeah. I've never met someone who was so skilled at that as you. Here we go. I don't think this has ever happened during the history of sight and sound, Alan. I'm pretty sure.
Now,
there you go.
May I get up to give it to someone? Or must I sit here?
Go ahead, and we'll find someone who can use it.
Even though it's not pink, it's blue, you can guess who it's for.
Yeah, indeed. Not for me, by the way.
I don't know why. I can't give you any kind of logic. When I was at the Hebrew Union College, there was a group outside of the college called Magical Ministers. And I joined them.
And you said Cincinnati was boring. Sounds like a pretty cool place.
Yeah, there was this wonderful lawyer here in town who was probably the worst lawyer that the city of Toledo ever had, Levy, and he taught me how to do this.
Now, you also, in addition to balloon animals, have been a guest artist in some charitable endeavors. You made glass pieces, is that right? In fact, your first job, you said, was working with glass, but you now
not only work. My family in Europe, my father's family, we think they, again, I go back to the 50% comment I made to you, came from the Provence. That's how my great-grandfather was in the Napoleonic Army. The Provence was the source of the glass for the great cathedrals of Europe, stained glass. I have in my house a stained glass window that my grandparents made and gave to a synagogue in Newark, New Jersey. And when that synagogue was sold to when the community moved and sold to a church, they went in and liberated it and put it in its place, a stained glass window with a cross. And I have that. It's one of my most precious gifts. So that's glass chips are in my blood too.
Absolutely. Well, as we mentioned, you're so busy in retirement. You were quoted in a Blade story in 2015, just last year, and you had this to say about retirement. Retirement doesn't mean that the mind or the body or the soul ceases to exist. I'd say that's a pretty good philosophy for life, for golden years, however you want to describe it. Can you amplify on what you were getting at there?
Well, I don't know if you know this. I'm now doing for the College of Medicine. I'm now the executive director. I love the title. I hate the title. I really hate it. I'm a rabbi. That's the title I like. But for sending our fourth-year medical students to different places in the world where they can serve. And so I'm now doing that.
Wow.
But
so retirement really is it hasn't happened yet.
Well, I don't know what I'm running out of friends. This I will admit. I'm but having said that, a person has to have a reason to get up in the morning. The people who sit in front of television and drink beer all day, I've buried.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that's what they look forward to there are people who only work for retirement. I've heard many people, I take this job with the university or with the school system or whatever because I can retire in 30 years.
Yeah.
It is something that is so foreign to my mind that I can't even begin to understand it.
I quite agree. It's one of the reasons I do things
that
like
you
this.
Do what you
Absolutely.
do, of course.
As you look back, Alan, over your 90 years, do you have any regrets?
Oh, of course I have regrets. I've hurt people at times that sometimes unintentionally. Mm-hmm. A couple of times I got angry and hurt people when I shouldn't have. Life has been serendipitous for me. I've just been lucky in everything. I was lucky when I was in service in my last ship, the destroyer Escort, with this fellow who became my friend. He and I talked ideas. When everybody else, when we were in the Mediterranean, I remember everybody else went on leave when they or liberty when they get off the ship, and they went off to get drunk. We went to see the ruins of Carthage together. Mm-hmm. When we were in England, we went to see Westminster Cathedral. Mm-hmm. It was just luck that he was on that vessel when I was on that vessel. If I had no one to talk to, I wouldn't have grown. Because growth is, I don't believe we can, maybe flowers, if planted, can grow by themselves, but I don't think we human beings can grow by ourselves. I think we human beings need someone to grow with. Mm-hmm. The way I met Mickey Totally. I had to do because I was on my way to go to Israel.
Yeah.
Had nothing to do with looking for a girl. And
Yeah.
at that point, I'd run through half of the Jewish girls of New York at that point anyway.
The serendipity played a big part in your life, as it does most of us.
How did I get to Elmont? I was very active in youth activities. I was the dean of many, many conclaves and group. And Elmont was looking for a rabbi, and they had basically come to a decision. And the letter saying that I was open, that was when I was in Bloomfield, New Jersey, said I was open to look for another congregation. They had already pretty much made up their mind, but they read it, and somebody said, "Oh, I know that name. My son was at a conclave. That's the rabbi with the red shorts."
Oh, my goodness.
I was the dean of the conclave, and you have to have a gimmick. You see, what's her name? Rose, I'll think of Gypsy Rose Lee. Mm-hmm. And in that show, she sings, you have to have a gimmick. Well, you have to have a gimmick. My gimmick then was to have red shorts that the kids could steal at night and put up on the flagpole. They said, "Oh, my son raved about that rabbi with the red shorts." That's how I ended up in, quite by accident. Mm-hmm. They had already basically made a decision.
Yeah. Life is
how
full.
did I come out here? Because they said to me, it's a great place to raise kids. Mm-hmm. Not because I wanted Toledo. I didn't want Toledo.
But it turned out they were right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's too early, I suppose, to talk about your legacy because you're still adding to it. But other than having to explain to your grandchildren someday who Gypsy Rose Lee was, what do you hope their impression of your legacy will be?
They have it. They have it. They have respect. They have love for each other. They have respect for each other. They have caring for each other. And when you start with each other, then it moves out beyond that. Mm-hmm. They are potentially, at this point, they're interested in where they're going to go to work, which friends they're going to be with at night. I was that way at a given point, and so were you, I assume. Mm-hmm. But they have already in them those things. And Mickey and I have contributed. The biggest contributor, Sharon, is an amazing, I don't know how she does it. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know all the things she does. Jonathan, no less. Yeah. No less. Yeah. And all of them are, when I have to close my eyes, I will do so with absolute security in knowing that what comes after me is really quality.
Rabbi Alan Sokobin, we thank you so much for your time today. I know all of us are grateful that you did decide to come to Toledo, and I think you've made Toledo a better place by being here.
I am both pleased and honored to be a part of this program.
Thank you so much, and we thank you as well for your interest in the Sight and Sound Video Archives project of the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. Remember, keep reading and keep learning.